The 5x5 Texas method is legendary. But does it actually live up to the hype? My name is Menno Henselmans. I'm an exercise scientist, a former fitness model, and a personal trainer with over a decade of experience. In this video, I'm going to review the 5x5 Texas method by Mark Rippetoe as published on T-Nation and StartingStrength.com to see if it is as good as the legend proclaims. First, who is this program for? Rippetoe says this program is for intermediate level trainees who have tried something like starting strength and are now starting to stall. They have had the newbie effect, their novice gains are gone, and they now need a more serious program to advance. And Mark even says this program will overtrain your ass quickly if you don't pay attention. Now, is this for strength trainees or is it also for size? On that, Mark says, interestingly, strength gains are the basis of an increase in size. In effect, size is a side effect of strength, and an intelligently designed and applied program can drive strength. Size is a side effect of strength. I would say that it's almost completely the other way around, because research quite conclusively shows that it is very possible to build a lot of strength without any size. You can think of strength as the outcome of both morphological and neurological adaptations. It's like the speed a car can drive at. You have the size of the engine, or in general the structure of the engine. That's like how much muscle mass you have, or morphological structures. And then you have neurological structures, which is like the skill of the driver. So you can make a car a lot faster, and you can become a lot stronger by making the driver, your brain, the motor cortex, or the nervous system in general, more efficient. So saying that size is a side effect of strength doesn't make a lot of sense. You can build a lot of strength without gaining a lot of size. You cannot build size without gaining strength. An increase in physiological cross-sectional area of the muscle, so basically an increase in muscle size, will inevitably increase force output production in an untrained movement, at least in a movement like all given equal skill of the driver, the nervous system. And almost always that will improve over time or stay the same if you're performing the exercise that you're testing at. So I would say this doesn't really make a lot of sense, but we can say that this program is intended for both size and strength gains. As far as the structure of the actual program, the program consists of a volume day on Monday, a recovery day on Wednesday, and an intensity day on Friday. So you train 3 days a week. One day is very much focused on doing a lot of volume. Friday is the intensity day where you're going to be setting 5 RMs. And Wednesday is a bit more of an intermediate, lighter day. Regarding the 5x5, which is a quite famous structure, Rippetoe says, for volume, 5 sets of 5 reps across the same weight repeated for the work sets have proven to be the optimum combination of volume and intensity. I would not agree with that at all. For one, research has typically or very conclusively shown that the total weekly volume per muscle group is the most important determinant of both strength and size development. And for strength, it's more related to the exercise that you're doing, and for size, it's more related to total volume per muscle group. So saying that 5x5 is ideal, that really depends on how often you're training, which exercise you're doing, which exercise you want to get stronger at. Plus, really, if you think about it, 5x5, anytime you see those things, 10x10, 5x5, 3x3, you have to wonder, is that really the result of scientific optimization or decades of experience compiling the data and finding, yeah, this is really what works best? Or is it just an arbitrary number that people thought sounded nice? You know, like the optimum just happens to be exactly 5 times 5? I don't buy that. All right, so let's look at the first day of the program. Monday, volume day. First exercise you do, squat, 5 sets of 5 at 95% of 5 RM. B, or exercise number 2, bench press or overhead press. Also 5 sets of 5 at 90% of 5 RM. And then exercise number 3 is the deadlift, 1 set of 5 at 90% of 1 RM. So a couple things regarding this. One, first thing I would note is that if you say 5 sets of 5 at 95% or at 90% of 5 RM, I do not like that type of programming, because research shows that people are very different in terms of their work capacity and their intensity rep relationship. So women in particular can typically do more repetitions with a given intensity than men. So I think this program is very much oriented towards men and has not considered that people are different, in particular women versus men, because 90% of 5RM might be very difficult for some people. It might be relatively easy for some people. I've had some clients who could do 5 sets of 5 with their 6RM. And me, for example, I probably need to do it with my 8RM or something. Otherwise, it's not happening. Another thing is that there is no rest interval prescription. And what you often see, I think in some articles, Rippetoe has said it's 8 to 10 minutes. You have to complete it with less than 8 to 10 minutes of rest. That's a pretty broad range, and two, it's also a hell of a rest interval. So what you very often see is that people start this program and they're doing 5 sets of 5, and okay, doable. And as they start progressing in weight, they start resting longer and longer and longer. And that's not real progress in strength, because at first you were doing 5 sets of 5 with your 8RM, the 8 rep max. And over time, you were just resting longer and longer. So now you're doing 5 sets of 5 with your 6RM. So you're almost doing 5 true 5RMs. And because you're not standardizing the rest interval, which I think is crucial when you're doing progression in reps across sets, you're essentially faking your own progress. Another observation I immediately make is that this volume is quite unbalanced, and also mixing between the overhead press and the bench press. That's, they target very different muscle groups. It's not like you can just do one or the other. If he said like front squat or back squat, okay, that's quite similar, but overhead press and bench press are quite dissimilar movements. But more on that later, because as I said, it depends on the weekly total. So maybe this workout will be balanced out by another workout. Another thing that he says is that the deadlift is unique among the power lifts, or at least among the 3 exercises done here, because it's very hard to recover from, and that's why it only has 1 set as opposed to 5 sets for the other lifts. Now, he says deadlifts are another story. There is no volume day for deadlifts because deadlifts are too hard to do for sets across. Most people find that they cannot be recovered from, if you do more than 1 heavy set. This is something that anecdotally I would tend to agree with. Deadlifts can really beat you up. However, research has actually found, in I think 2 or 3 studies now have been done on this, that deadlifts, squats, and even the bench press are not different in terms of neuromuscular recovery. So it's not that they beat up your nervous system or your muscles more. What I think happens is that for many people, heavy deadlifts, especially when you do them with maybe not optimal technique, which is often what happens when you're doing them with a very heavy weight, it really beats up your connective tissue, your ribs, attachments of the ribs, your back. And in general, isometric muscle contractions have been found in some research to be particularly fatiguing. It may also be more mental fatigue in that case. So I think that neuromuscularly speaking, like in terms of can the muscle recover from this, it's not true that deadlifts are harder to recover from than squats. But in practice, I think they will beat up your connective tissues, your joints, ligaments, all of that stuff, possibly more than squats and bench presses, which is why people feel very beat up after deadlifts in practice sometimes. Regardless of the mechanism possibly being wrong, it may be good to still limit the volume of deadlifts, because you don't want to beat up your connective tissues either, regardless of it, whether it's the muscle, the nervous system, the connective tissue. You want to recover in all ways. So it may still make sense to reduce deadlift volume, and if you're doing super high volume training, a lot of powerlifters have been successful doing less deadlift volume than squat and bench press volume. So overall, I would say this is prudent and justifiable. But what you have to be aware of is that you then need to do compensatory volume later during the session or in the week to make up for that volume, because you still want to get the volume in, you just want to use different exercises rather than the deadlift, because doing only deadlifts will beat you up too much. Another interesting note regarding this workout, because I said it was relatively unbalanced, is that Rippetoe does say, if it were me, I'd limit any assistance exercises to some brief arm work on Monday. So he kind of acknowledges that the program is unbalanced in the sense of volume, and you might need some additional arm work. However, I don't think really the arms are the main issue. Like, there's no biceps training at all in this workout, so just doing the power lifts. So you definitely need some biceps work in there, I would say, not optional. It's a definite must. For the triceps though, you're doing 5 sets of bench presses, pressing the weight up. You can see my previous video on bench press technique. The long head essentially pulls the elbow back if it contracts too much, or at least it produces a moment for that. It may not be optimal for the body to recruit the long head of the triceps fully during bench presses, and typically that's why it won't be fully recruited and muscle growth will not be maximal. So in that sense, I would say probably you also need some work for the long head of the triceps here, but as we'll get to later, there are more muscle groups like the rear deltoids that are not really fully addressed in this day. So let's look at the other days. Moving on to Wednesday, recovery day. Exercise 1 is squats, 2 sets of 5 at 80% of Monday's work weight. So let's say you're not very strong yet, you squat with 100 kilos, then you're going to do this with 80 kilos. 2 sets of 5 at 80 kilos is truly a recovery workout. It's probably not enough to stimulate muscle growth. And the same for, in this case, overhead press. If you bench pressed on Monday, 3 sets of 5, and then it says at a little lighter weight than you normally do, so probably also something like 80% or probably 90% of 5RM or Monday's weight, or bench press, he says. Second exercise, overhead press if you bench pressed on Monday, or bench press if you overhead pressed on Monday. So you're alternating between these. If you do the overhead press, you do 3 sets of 5 at a slightly lighter weight than the previous overhead press weight, which is interestingly much less concretely defined than all the other weights in the program. And if you do bench press, you do 3 sets of 5 at 90% of the previous 5 times 5 weight. So that's probably enough to stimulate some muscle growth because it's at 90% instead of 80% like the squats, which is also an interesting difference here. And then the next exercise is chin-ups, 3 sets of body weight to failure with a 5-minute rest interval. Okay, again, interesting that this is with body weight and not at a certain RM. And then back extensions or glute-ham raises, 5 sets of 10. So this whole workout seems honestly super arbitrary to me. Like the back extensions or glute-ham raises, okay, those are completely different exercises. Glute-ham raises also train knee flexion, which means they train the short head of the biceps femoris, they train the gastrocnemius, and they are not very intensive for the erector spinae, your back. Back extensions are, depending on how you perform them, focused on either the back extensors, the erector spinae, or the posterior chain, meaning the glutes and the hamstrings. So it's quite different muscle groups. You cannot just do one or the other. You'll have to balance that out in terms of volume. And then 5 sets of 10 is also very different in terms of recovery because he says that back extensions are optional if you're tired, since experience has shown that they really don't contribute to your squat or deadlift. They are placed in the program as active rest for your back. Okay, if you're doing them as active rest, which is something that actually works. Research shows that active rest is better than not doing anything. But 5 sets of 10, for one, okay, that maybe, this is for intermediate level trainees, so it shouldn't be very difficult, but depending on the setup of the machine and the lever arms and how straight you keep your legs, 5 sets of 10 may actually be quite intensive for some individuals, definitely not active rest. And then if you say, or glute-ham raises, that makes no sense because 5 sets of 10 of strict glute-ham raises are definitely very intensive for most intermediate lifters. I would say that's more of an advanced level exercise, in fact. So I just don't really understand this logic at all. And then chin-ups are with body weight, 3 sets of body weight to failure. That's probably fine. There are probably very few intermediate trainees who are gonna become so strong at chin-ups that body weight is not sufficient. But there are gonna be very wide discrepancies here. If you have a power lifter that's 300 pounds, then maybe their chin-ups, they can only do a few. Maybe they can't even do any if they're really heavy. So it doesn't make much sense to me to just say body weight. This should also specify something like 8RM, or if you cannot do chin-ups, do something like pull-downs. Either way, the stimulus is going to be very different if you do chin-ups for 3 sets of 5 or 3 sets of 15. And the overhead press or the bench press, okay, so those are alternating, which I think I already said. This also doesn't make a lot of sense because the overhead press clearly targets the side delts more and the bench press clearly targets the pecs more. So you're training different muscle groups. And then the structure essentially seems that squats are very light, not enough to stimulate muscle growth. And the idea is probably that the bench press is the most difficult to recover from. The squats follow that and the bench press follows that. But as I said, research actually shows that although it may feel this way mentally, in terms of neuromuscular recovery, there is no difference between the power lifts. So yeah, this probably also doesn't make a lot of sense. This squat workout is going to be, especially for an intermediate level trainee, it's not going to do anything other than maybe be some technique and speed work. Whereas the bench press workout is going to do something, and then the overhead press workout, although undefined, slightly lighter weight, let's say it's pretty intensive, 3 sets of 5 is obviously going to do something. It's going to be a significant stimulus for muscle growth and strength development. So here you're getting a super arbitrary combination of what's supposed to be a recovery day might actually be super intensive if you're doing 5 sets of 10 glute-ham raises, and then the chin-ups might be either very heavy or very light. The squats are probably going to be super light for anyone, bench press okay, overhead press a lot more intensive. So all the muscle groups are getting hit by very different levels of stimulus in this workout. Honestly, it doesn't make a lot of sense to me, regardless of how the rest of the week looks. Speaking of the rest of the week, let's move on to Friday. Friday is intensity day, and it does squat, bench press, and power clean or power snatch, interestingly. So squats, you do an extensive warm-up and then work up to a 5 RM. So it's one set of 5 instead of 5 sets of 5 reps across, one set of 5 at your true 5 RM. For the bench press, same. If you bench pressed on Monday, you do the bench press. If you overhead pressed on Monday, you do the overhead press again. So I think most weeks are going to be very dominant on the bench press or very dominant on the overhead press. I would say it makes more sense to alternate between these rather than do 1 week focused on one week focused on the other. Just alternate by workout. In any case, that's also working up to a heavy single at a 5 RM. And then power cleans or power snatches are done at 5 sets of 3 or 6 sets of 2. And there's no specification of what weight that is. But he says it's for explosiveness, so I would assume it's not going to be super heavy. Typically, you don't do the Olympic lifts that heavy. Whether you should do Olympic lifts at all in the first place, because in a pure strength hypertrophy program, I would never program Olympic lifting myself. They are very technical exercises that most people have no business learning because they're not very effective for muscle growth. You don't do much of eccentric muscle contractions. You don't train the muscles through a full range of motion. There's very high technique requirements, especially if you do them at the end of a session. You're going to be fatigued. It's going to be relatively injurious, a lot of effort, and not a lot of bang for your buck in terms of muscle growth or strength development. However, Rippetoe says, if you want to call yourself a lifter, you need to know how to clean and snatch, even if you don't intend to compete in Olympic weightlifting. Ooh, spicy. Yeah, I would completely disagree with that. I would say the exact opposite. I would say that if you don't compete in Olympic weightlifting, you have no business doing the Olympic lifts. It's, like I said, it's a ton of effort, a lot of risk for very, very little reward. All right, so having discussed the whole program, here's what I like and what I dislike about the program. Starting with my likes, I think it is great that this program provides a structure that aims for progressive overload. In general, having a structure in your program versus not having a structure is, I think, a big differentiating factor between who's going to be making it to the advanced level in their lifting career and who is not. So any program, anything that provides good structure in your training is better than something that doesn't provide structure. As for the specific structure, I think it doesn't make a whole lot of sense in this case. More on that with my dislikes, but it does provide a good structure. And secondly, it provides progressive overload, so it really forces you to train hard. And I think a lot of people need that. They need rep targets or they need goals in their training to make sure that they are lifting hard and that they have a structure in place to ensure progressive overload, because that is key to long-term development. As I said, the specific structure I don't like so much. In fact, I don't like it at all, to be honest, because for one, I think this is the most important problem with the program. It is woefully unbalanced in terms of which muscle groups you train. If you look at the volume, okay, it's good for the power lifts. It has some structure. You're doing, even for that though, it's quite weird because it's typically 6 to 9 sets per week per power lift, but then the deadlift is only 1 set. Okay, maybe you get away with that, but there's also not a lot of volume for the hamstrings in there. So a bit dubious. And then the overhead press and the bench press you alternate. So per week it will also differ how much volume you do per lift. But okay, you know, bench press, overhead press, squats, they're okay. In the deadlift, maybe you get away with that. With, you know, not deadlifting as much. In my experience, if you work on your squat a lot and you do some decent volume for the erector spinae, which in this case might be via the back extensions, even though they're recovery work. So yeah, I'm skeptical of the efficacy of this program for the deadlift. But it might be okay. Many lifters get away with not deadlifting much. If you work on your squat a lot, you're probably also gonna see deadlift gains, even if you don't do a lot of deadlift volume. In this case, literally only being 1 set per week, but then the power cleans help. Yeah, in any case, I think this program will be okay for the power lifts, but that doesn't mean you're gonna have balanced overall development. Think of the other muscle groups. For the biceps, what are you doing? You're doing 3 sets of chin-ups with body weight. That is it. That is your biceps volume. Even disregarding, you know, long head, short head, stretch mediate hypertrophy, synergistic exercise selection, having more than 1 exercise per muscle group, you're literally just doing chin-ups. So it's going to be a terrible program for the biceps. And then, okay, Mark says you could do some extra arm work on Monday, and maybe you can do so much arm work that it's going to be enough for the biceps. But then let's talk about the rear deltoids, for example, or the traps. you're doing so little volume for these muscle groups that are very important, arguably also for shoulder health, but also just for balanced development. This is gonna, like, the front delts are gonna be hit like crazy, because they're gonna be hit whether you bench press or overhead press. So the front delts you're hammering every single week, but the rear delts and the side delts, you don't train those much at all. I mean, chin-ups are okay for the rear delts, but they're not like the best exercise for them. And just 3 sets of chin-ups are not going to be enough to have proportionally developed delts. So you're going to have the problem that most people have with their delts, where the front head is massively overdeveloped, side delt is okay, and the front delt's really small. So it kind of like tapers off to the back rather than having like this big round cannonball delt. And that's not even talking about things like regional muscle hypertrophy, such as the long head of the triceps, different heads of the hamstrings. Like I said, the short head of the biceps femoris, for example, will basically not be trained at all if you do the back extensions instead of the glute-ham raises. So yeah, this program is really unbalanced in terms of volume per muscle group. Another thing I don't like about this program is that it is almost exclusively low rep work. And research finds that even for strength development, it may be better to do high and low rep work. There is some research from Russia, for example, that suggests that high and low rep work activate different growth pathways in the body. There are also a couple Western studies that find at least a trend for a combination of low and high rep work to work better for both strength development and muscle growth. There's also a wide research literature, daily undulating periodization, or in fact any types of other periodization than what's used in this program, that it can enhance strength development. Daily undulating periodization is very well established to enhance strength development, in fact. So I'd say that even for strength developments in the powerlift specifically, this program will probably not achieve that for lifters beyond the novice level. Plus, the reason that I think many people perceive this program as very demanding, and Rip also says like this will overtrain your ass if you're not careful, is because you're doing only low rep work, and low rep work is very stressful for the connective tissues. You're doing a very limited exercise selection that's really centered on the powerlifts, and you're doing all of it for low rep work, and that's gonna give your connective tissues, your joints, your ligaments, tendons, one hell of a beating. So your total volume per muscle group is actually very low, almost non-existent for muscles like the rear delts of the biceps, the hamstrings, biceps even. So despite that, it still feels like super heavy workouts. And many people complain that the workouts may even be too much. And it's not because of the neuromuscular overloading, because clearly the volume is very low. It's because you're hammering the same exercises that are also not inherently super joint friendly for a lot of people. You're hammering those for low rep work all the time. So it's relatively injurious, and that's why it feels so hard. Also mentally, the power lifts are very stressful for most people. They're rather technical lifts. So you spend a lot of mental energy, and your connective tissues are beat up a lot. But in terms of actual muscular stimulus, I think this program is actually more inadequate than excessive. So in conclusion, would I recommend this program? Honestly, no, I would not. I would not recommend this program for almost anyone. I would see this more as a general template that you could use as an intermediate level powerlifter to build a more complete workout around. And you probably want to tweak almost all of the specifics to really optimize it. I think it was successful because it provides some structure, and just Rippetoe is a great author. He provides a very compelling, even if completely non-scientific case for the program. He has a certain style, it feels cool, it's about strength development, it's about what it means to be a real lifter, but scientifically speaking, almost all the specifics of the program make very little sense. So I think this is going to be very far from optimal for almost anyone, and it's more, I would say, a historical illustration of some structure that you can have in a program rather than something that you should actually do. If you like this content, be sure to like and subscribe. I'm going to be doing more reviews of popular training programs later on. I'm going to do dog rep training, and I'm going to do 531 by Jim Wendler. So lots of new content coming out. Right? I hope this helped you optimize your programs and think more scientifically about optimal training program design.